Welcome to day 6 of 13 Days of Halloween. And I must say, this is going more successful than I ever imagined. Just get my shirt in there so you know it's Halloween related. This is Dylan Lang. I am the host of this show, but I also run a channel called Dylan Knows. I've done a YouTube show now for about 11 years. I'm close to episode 600. I do it every Saturday night, live show. I also have a list show, which is what this is a spinoff kind of where I do periodically whenever I come up with a list. Just started that this year. Also did a conversations with myself, which I started last year. It's another one that I do only randomly when I want to talk about one single subject the whole time. I've got plans for In Defense Of, where I'm going to do in defense of stuff that people don't like, and also my giant project for 2025 that hopefully will get done, but we'll see. I'm notoriously lazy when it comes to like this, is the In Defense of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I think it totally deserves. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here talking about a crazy plan that I decided to do. 13 straight days of live shows for my channel, talking various things that are related to Halloween-esque sort of things, horror, whatever you want to talk about. I've already done 2 episodes with divided up the top 80 best Halloween movies. Did my regular show. Did the best Tim Burton movies and the best John Carpenter movies. Before I go on, I must say this, first of all. Thank you for my new subscribers. I appreciate it 100%. I'm glad you're liking what I'm doing. Also want to appreciate everyone who's been viewing this. I have been knocked asunder about how well this is being regarded. My show usually, and I'm okay with this because I do this because I feel like it, and I know I'm not a big channel, but I average about 6 to 8 views, maybe 10 if I'm lucky every once in a while for my regular shows. I've been almost doubling most of that. So I've been having 13s, 19s, 21s, 16s, 17s, and the big one now, 32 views for my John Carpenter one. So I'm hoping I can continue to build on that because I still got a lot of cool stuff coming out. Today is going to be the last one of taking a look at one specific person who's handling stuff. In this case, Stephen King. It made sense to do a Stephen King thing, and I haven't read enough of his books to do a list of novels. I've read a bunch of them, but not enough to do a best of list because he has such a, and I'll talk about, actually, I'll get that in a second. I usually describe what I'm talking about before I do the list. But you got to listen to this. So stick with me on here and keep watching because I still got 7 more to go. And one of which might be on Halloween where I might just say, heck with it, I'm not going to do a show. I don't know yet. I haven't decided what I'm doing for Halloween itself. Or I might just do something stupid like the top 30 movies of 1994 because a major event in my life happened on Halloween, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Anyway, tomorrow, Thursday, I'm going to do my best supernatural / cryptid show, and I'm excited for that one. I don't know the order for the rest of them, but I think Friday might be the best slashers. Or as I said, I know tomorrow is going to be the cryptid and supernatural, but the rest of it, I got to look at my schedule. I wrote it down, but that's at work. I know I'm doing best slashers. I know I'm doing best Halloween specials. I'm doing best best spooky TV series. I'm doing my best costumes I ever did, and I'm doing what makes Halloween great. Now that leaves 2 Halloween where I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, if I'm going to do anything, because Halloween is usually big around here, and it is on a Thursday. So we'll see what happens. But next Tuesday, as long as she's still up to it, if she decides to back out, that's not a big deal. My daughter is going to do a part of my 13 Days of Halloween. It won't be me. I'll help set it up, but my daughter will be doing it. She'll be on this page. She is going to be 18 years old in December. And when she was growing up, her favorite thing in the world was Monster High dolls. And obviously, as she got older, she got away from that. But for the longest time, it was Monster High. We had the videos. She had a ton of Monster High dolls and dressed up as the costume and stuff like that. And then she got away from it as she got older. But then as she's been going through high school and stuff like that, nostalgia, retro stuff has been bubbling back up inside her, and she's been deep diving back into it. And she's gotten kind of back into it, not where she's collecting the stuff, but she's reading stuff about it, watching the videos and stuff like that. So she wants to talk about Monster High. So it might not necessarily be a list show per se. It might just be her discussing her thoughts on Monster High dolls. And I think that's cool because it's my daughter, and I appreciate it. I am so proud of her, and I love her so much. And I think it's so cool that she wants to assist me in this. So we'll see what happens. If she decides to back out for whatever reason, which is okay also, I might be able to throw my, as I said, 30 best movies of 1994, which I'm dying to do also. And I'm going to probably do it sometime soon. Even if it's not during 13 Days of Halloween, I might do it as soon as next week, or beginning of November, I should say. Also got a political one because the election's coming up. I've got a political movie list that I'm going to be doing here soon too. So I've got, I ain't going anywhere. So people who want to watch my stuff, I do a weekly show. But if you like this kind of stuff, particularly the list show stuff, I got tons of them. I got tons of lists. Just a matter of working out the logistics and stuff like that and doing them when I want to. But done talking. I'm going to take a swig of my apple cider. Lovely seasonal treat. And okay, sorry, I just had to think about something. So let's move to the next episode. So today we're going to do the top 30 best Stephen King adaptations, and that's TV and movies. A few ground rules. As all my list shows, I do at least one honorable mention. Sometimes I doubled up. My John Carpenter one I doubled up yesterday. I'm doubling up today as well. But I'm also making some slight changes as well, because again, this is my list. In my show, I can do whatever I want to do with it, and it's just how I'm going to do it. There has been so many adaptations of Stephen King's stuff and multiple ones of certain shows that I sort of condense them into one. So like one, like The Stand or It or The Shining or Salem's Lot. Those ones come off the top of my head right now. I will condense all the stuff together into one, and maybe not talk about each one specifically, but talk about what maybe makes it so interesting and what makes them so good and why it's in that location on my list. Excuse me. So it contains movies, TV shows, and limited series that were on streaming and stuff like that, and covers a wide range of stuff because Stephen King is one of the most interesting writers you've ever met. He started off excuse me, looking like he was just going to be a typical horror movie guy. And okay, I hope they're okay with the TV upstairs. He started off as just writing horror, but then his interest sort of expanded, and he's built this voix of writing, which includes horror and still includes horror. Short stories. Some of his best work is short stories, and they're not all horror. Some are thriller, some are other stuff as well. He's done fantasy, Eyes of the Dragon, fairy tales, a couple ideas off the top of my head, Sleeping Beauties as well. He's done more crime stuff like Mr. Mercedes series, Lisey's story, stuff like that. Stuff that isn't overtly horrific, like a Gerald's Game or something like that. His epic opus, he's got two, actually. I should say his epic is The Stand. His opus, his magnum opus, is the Dark Tower saga. The Dark Tower saga is, 8-9 books. And hopefully Mike Flanagan, who keeps throwing projects together, will eventually get to work on his Dark Tower saga on streaming. He just announced this week that he's going to be doing a limited series of Carrie, an adaptation of Carrie, which is going to be awesome, but I want to see your Dark Tower stuff, man. Plus, he's doing the Exorcist reboot, so he's got to be. And Mike Flanagan is one of those guys that he does a lot of Stephen King stuff. And a lot of his stuff that isn't Stephen King related has very Stephen King-esque qualities to it. One of Stephen King's best books that he ever wrote was On Writing, where it's basically half the book is a memoir and the other half is a teaching course on how to write. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is not really a horror film per se. It has aspects of it, but it's not really horror. So he throws all kinds of different things at you, and stuff like Shawshank Redemption, again, not too horrific. Stand By Me, stuff like, there's aspects here and there, but not everything is horror. But just for whatever reason, Stephen King is the epitome of horror. And his stories, my one complaint about him is that he has great ideas and he starts strong, but his endings always seem to sort of fall flat for me. For most of the books I've read, not all of them, but for most of the stuff I've read, the endings have fall flat. That's why I love his short stories better, because they're more condensed and better. The endings are better, stuff like that. But his bigger novels, the endings sort of collapse upon the weight of what he just brought out about how great it was, the greatness of it. And so, everything okay? Guess they didn't hear me. So, without further ado, I've talked 11 minutes now, so that means this one's going to be long. We'll get started. Gotta bear with me also. I had written all the stuff down. I had to rate it this morning. So it's all over the place. And I didn't get a chance to rewrite it because I got home and I was going to get dinner started, but I had other things I had to take care of before that. So bear with me as I look around here. But right now I see first we got to do the honorable mentions. Honorable mentions are two TV series. One which had potential but absolutely blew it. And the other one is pretty decent, has a pretty decent pedigree, gets some good critic stuff. It's Under the Dome and Mr. Mercedes. Under the Dome is one of his more recent massive books. And it's an interesting idea about a town that one morning wakes up and there's an invisible dome over the whole town. And people can see... They can't see in, but they can see out, sort of things. And then what happens when you trap a bunch of people into a dome, and what happens after that. Under the Dome was a good idea to adapt. It was a summer TV show, and it was a good idea to adapt it. However, what the problem was is a small book. I mean, not small, but it's a decent sized book. But to spread it out over multiple season TV show was not going to work. But that's exactly what they tried, because when the first season came out, it did bonkers. It did fantastic. And with most adaptations, it had to switch up some stuff a little bit. So it added a lot of things, changed some stuff up than the novel. So it wasn't an adaptation of the novel. So they had to expand on it. And then it was such a big hit. But then they said, hey, we'll do a season 2. And then it just sort of fell flat. And I don't even think they did a season 3. They might have done a season 3. I don't know if they did, though. But they expanded too much and it fell back on itself. And I think the ending is completely different than the one that's in the book. So it was just, they took the general idea, sort of like what Kubrick did with Shining, took the general idea and then made it their own sort of their expanded story. And it was okay. It was fun the first season because when I was part of the group called Snark Alex, we snarked Under the Dome all the time and talked about it on Snark Alex Radio and the show that me and Tony Solo did as well. So now that's that. So it would have done better probably as one of these nowadays. I mean, this was years ago. This was like 2016, something like that when this came out. It probably would, before the advent stream, it probably would be better as sort of a Netflix 9-episode limited series directed by a Mike Flanagan, something like that, where it would adapt the book. But because it's very specific, you could add certain things, but you don't have to spread it over 3 seasons. You can just condense. You can have it here and expand it like to here in order to fit the 9-episode window, and then say that's it, we're done. You could do something like that. Mr. Mercedes is like the opposite of that. It was a trilogy of books, and actually there's a fourth one out now, I think, coming. That's part of the set. And they got Oscar, no, it should be Oscars. It's Emmy caliber talent. Brendan Gleeson is in it from the Harry Potter movies and many multiple Oscar nominated films. And the upcoming Spider-Man Noir, by the way, which is going to be cool. And it's this, and again, Stephen King has such a wide variety of stuff that he does that he did this as it's sort of an action criminal sort of story with no real supernatural aspect to it. And because it had 3 books, they were able to expand the story and take bits and pieces from all 3 books and combine it into the stream series. Again, I don't know how many seasons it lasted, a couple at least, I think, but it did hit a lot of Oscar noms and stuff like that, and became a critical darling and stuff like that. So those are my honorable mentions, because I really, honestly, I wasn't that interested in it, and I watched a little of it. So, I have watched bits and pieces of at least most of this stuff, and in most cases, all of them. But I feel I have the okay to talk about stuff, I might not have seen the entirety of it. But again, that's only a few things, and even then I did see bits and pieces, and I know about the stories. Now we can start with number 30. Number 30 is the Tommyknockers. Tommyknockers is one of Stephen King's rare alien books. He's got a couple of them out there. Tommyknockers is one of them. And in the 90s, after the success of It and The Stand, more TV networks wanted to adapt more of these books into these two-night miniseries things. This is before streaming again, or 4-night miniseries things or whatever. And because It and The Stand were so successful, there were a whole bunch of other ones, and there's a couple of them on this list. First of which was the Tommyknockers, which in and of itself is an okay version of Body Snatchers, kind of Stephen King's version of Body Snatchers, and it is a alien horror film type of thing. Decent cast, I guess, but again, the problem is some of these films, or some of these adaptations, I should say, are movie theaters where you can get the hard R, you can go with the gore and the violence, the sex, whatever. And then the TV adaptations, you have a limit you can do due to FCC regulations and stuff like that, and families watching and stuff like that, where you don't have too much control over it. Whereas movie theaters, they can turn kids away if they're not old enough or they don't have an adult with them. So Langoliers could have been better. Maybe if it's done maybe if they remade it in a streaming or whatever. But again, it's not one of King's strongest books, and it is kind of just a veiled sort of version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers for the most part. It's a decent, and for the TV, it was a decent TV miniseries. So, but again, they had such limits that it was just kind of scratching the surface with what they could actually do. Number 29 is Storm of the Century. Storm of the Century is an original Stephen King story that he wrote directly for television. He did a couple of that also. It was a 6-hour miniseries set during the biggest blizzard in, I think, Maine history or something like that. And a mysterious stranger comes to a house seeking shelter from the storm and ends up upending the lives of not only the people in the house, but in the whole town. Set again in a massive blizzard snowstorm. The story, 6 hours of this sort of thing, is kind of a condensed, you're in a house alone sort of. It works well for television, probably wouldn't work well for a movie. And 6 hours, which was with commercials, so technically it was a 4-hour movie for the most part. It works because it's, as I said, it sort of keeps you entranced with the small group of people and just the pressures and the anxiety and stuff that builds up from that. And that's what Storm of the Century is. Again, a decent one, but again, a television film. But the difference there is that Stephen King wrote it directly for television. There is no Storm of the Century novel by Stephen King that's been published. No short stories, no novel, whatever. This was directly a film he wrote for television. He's written some other films directly for movies. We got one coming up in just a little bit. And still, technically, even though it's not really an adaptation, but an original version, it is still a Stephen King jam, as it were. Number 28, we find Firestarter with a very young Drew Barrymore when she was sort of in her E.T. sort of prime, and it's a movie, so you do have sort of the harder horror films of Stephen King stuff in that early 80s, mid 80s period. And then you have some of kind of these little smaller, not so bad ones like a Christine or a Cat's Eye, or in this case, Firestarter. Again, not really a horror movie per se, but a supernatural aspect, as Drew Barrymore is able to start fires with her mind. It's basically Stephen King writing an X-Men solo film for a mutant female who uses fire and controls it. And of course, you've got the typical, the U.S. government or a government or whatever wants to use her power for bad, stuff like that. But it's Drew Barrymore, and you got to love it. And it's number 28. Number 27 finds The Dark Half. Timothy Hutton, who unfortunately has had some legal issues lately, but a lot of people forget he's still was still a guy. It still is a damn good actor, but his personal lives and his issues that he's had has outgrown this. But The Dark Half is a great horror film and one of these underrated ones, and I think it's directed by a good director here. Hold on, let me see. No, I don't need to do it. Let me check in. This is probably not the place I need to look. George Romero, I think, is the director of it. Let me verify that. I popped that in my head without even looking it up yet, but I think George Romero directed The Dark Half. Yeah, George A. Romero, 1993. So, yeah. Timothy Hutton, Amy Madigan, Michael Rooker. Fantastic cast. Anyone else famous? No, not really. But again, one of his kind of lesser known books and one of his lesser known movies. But here's the catch, though. A lot of stuff Stephen does also is kind of personal in certain reasons and in certain situations as well. He might take bits and pieces from his life and maybe sort of skew stories out of it, or have stories come from that sort of thing. It might not necessarily have happened to him, but it is something that he's connected with. And we'll get into that further when we talk about Misery, which is down the line here. With The Dark Half, the main story about that, if you don't know what it is, The Dark Half is about a writer, successful writer, who has almost a secondary personality, like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of thing. And you can make the case who and I if I can remember correctly, I don't think the author knows about this other personality, and the other personality sort of takes over at night and does all kinds of horrific things. And then in the morning he's left holding the bag because he's sharing the same body with it or whatever. So he's got like a mental issue or whatever. But what's interesting about that is that, again, everyone knows the story about Stephen King. He started out as a writer under the pen name of Richard Bachman. And in this case, actually what the situation is that Timothy Hutton's character is a famous writer who uses a pseudonym, Thad Beaumont, to write some of these really, really horrific books. And that's where the whole thing happens, where he's writing as Thad Beaumont. And that's when he comes out and sort of has that mental break, and Thad Beaumont comes out and takes control of the body. And so like that. So could there have been a situation where when Stephen King was writing as Richard Bachman, he had some mental issues? Because we got to remember also, Stephen King, despite being a great writer now, and I think he's been clean now, he was a drug addict early on in his life. And I think he's okay now. But definitely. So the Dark Half is based on a novel, and it does seem to have a correlation with his relationship with Richard Bachman, which is his pseudonym that he uses for other books as well. And it's not unusual for authors to use pseudonyms. There's a whole bunch of authors that use pseudonyms because they know that if they do a James Patterson book or a Stephen King book, it's probably going to sell really well. But if they want to try something different, and if they tried it under their name, the people are going to look at it and say, this is crap. What the hell are you writing? This isn't what you do. So he wants to try something different. And eventually, people might pick up on it and say, okay, so he gets a chance to do something different. And nobody knows it's him, Dark House number 27. 26, we find Needful Things. I wish there was a better adaptation of Needful Things. It's decent, but it's not great. The reason why is because Needful Things is really like the first Stephen King novel I fully remember buying when it came out and reading it. It was like, it very well could be the very first Stephen King book I ever read. And of course, I knew about all the other ones, the Cujos, the Carries, the Shinings, the Stand, the It's, all those. But and the reason why I did it was because I liked Misery, and I hadn't read Misery, but I liked the movie. And when I heard that Castle Rock, who produced Misery and Stand By Me, because I like that one also, was going to do a version of Needful Things, it's like, okay, this should be pretty cool. So what I should do is I should see what the story is before the movie comes out, because I had heard maybe the stories of a Carrie or stuff like that, but I never actually read the book. I had just seen the clips and what people talked about, so I didn't know what they're talking about. This way, when I watched the movie, it was with fresh eyes, but I was seeing the movie version of it. So in most cases, I went back and I read the book of it and got the experience of both worlds. Needful Things was the first one where I read the book first, and I love the book. I think it's a great premise for a book. A mysterious stranger, the devil, sets up a shop in this small Maine town because Maine is Maine. It's a gorgeous scenery, and it's perfect for like this sort of gothic horror sort of stuff. And it's a shop that has everything that a specific person wants. So there is something that you are lusting for. I've always wanted something you've been trying to find or get, or want to remember, a nostalgia trip or whatever. You go in that shop, you're going to find it because he's the devil. Even though he doesn't distinctly come out and say he's the devil, but just gather from what it is that he's the devil. And so they see that object that they've been lusting after, and there's no price on it. And so the guy who runs it, the devil, is like, do this for me, and you can have this. Sometimes it's something innocuous like burning down. No, not burning down. Like spray painting someone's car. In one instance, because Stephen King is kind of iffy sometimes, he wants a woman to suck his dick in order to get the thing that she wants. And then with certain people, he knows that they are, and he can really get them. He gets them to do stuff like, can you kill the neighbor's dog, or can you burn down the bushes of your neighbor's house, that sort of thing, just to sort of strike a discord into the town. And it's up to a police officer to try to solve it. Now, Ed Harris plays the police officer, and it's fantastic casting and stuff like that. But there's just the film, and I think Max von Sydow, who has been pretty good at playing those types of roles, plays the guy who runs the shop, the devil. It's a decent adaptation, but that is the one downside of reading the book first and then seeing the movie, because now you know how good the book is, and then the movie doesn't meet what you expect from it. Apparently there's a 4-hour cut or something like that had some added footage on it that makes it better. I've just never cared to go out enough to go find it. I think it might be on my Amazon list, like down at the bottom, but it's not something I'm like, oh my God, I got to see this, because I cannot see for the life of me how, again, it's good and it's a decent adaptation, but it's on this because it's the first Stephen King book I remember reading, and I like the book, and the story, follows a general idea, but I don't think it quite hit what it was supposed to. What would have been great is that they would have cast Kiefer Sutherland in the role of this guy named Ace, who was the same character who he played in Stand By Me. So because King is also notorious for connecting all of his books, which is awesome, in certain weird and unusual ways, and in unexpected ways also. Like there's a book we'll talk about a little bit called 11/22/63, which is about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there's a scene where two of the Losers Club from It have a scene with the main story. I mean, they're not in the book. They have a scene with the main character in the book, but that's it. There's no mention of Pennywise or what they're doing or whatever. They're in the same town. So it's just kind of interesting and stuff like that. So I kind of like that kind of thing. So Needful Things, number 26, again, a kind of a disappointing adaptation, but it's on the list because it still has a good cast, and it's and the reason why I call it a decent adaptation and not a great one is because I read the book first. As I said, my first Stephen King book, I really remember buying the week it came out or whatever, and reading it almost right away. It was the first one I remember, and I had such high expectations, and it just, well, I've learned to quell those on a lot of different things. So we'll see what happens here. Number 25, where are you? There you are. I talked about this one last night. Number 25 is Christine. Again, kind of a it's kind of kind of like a Stephen King book, because it's about a car, and he loves cars, that's possessed. And the car falls in love with its owner and doesn't want anyone who does harm to the owner to survive. And that's it. That's really about it. It's one of his earlier stuff where he still was trying to work out some things. So as I said, maybe he needed to keep with some of the early stuff. Those early books don't have the problem that I was kind of talking about, where he sort of has that, the ending just sort of, I mean, there are aspects of that ending in some of the things, but he was just learning his way out. And then as he was getting more popular and coming with bigger and better ideas, he expanded the stories and made them these, like, sort of almost every single one of them is almost epic, where Christine is just a simple story. Cujo's a simple story. Carrie's a simple story. Those are Shining is kind of a simple story as well. Those are kind of the early stuff. Any period he jumps in there, Misery is an early story, easy story to follow. But as I said, some start going in, and gradually as he's getting more and more used to how his writing style is and how popular he is, he starts throwing in the stuff that you see where you get the 1,000-page It, and the 1,000-page The Stand, and the 1,000-page Under the Dome, and the 1,000-page 11/22/63, sort of stuff like that, where you get these massive. That's why I called the subtitle that verbal diarrhea, because Stephen King said that himself, and on writing, is that he has a problem with verbal diarrhea, where he tends to overwrite, I should say, his books. But Christine is one of those where it's not overwritten. It's a very quick, easy read and a very quick, easy watch. Nothing truly horrific, and seemed to be a little bit out of John Carpenter sort of way. I mean, he is more into kind of some high concept stuff. And this, while a possessed car maybe fits the bill a little bit, it just didn't seem to have the panache of a John Carpenter film, though it kind of does at the same time. It's still a decent movie. It's actually a really decent movie. It's an entertaining movie. And it's because the story is so simple, there's really not much you can do to fuck it up. And that's why it's number 25, because it's just sort of, it's there, and it's John Carpenter, but it's not, Number 24 is another one of those. I literally just mentioned it. Number 24 is Cujo. Again, easy premise. Beloved Saint Bernard gets rabies, goes wild, kills people. That's really it. Again, a very low concept, early piece of his writing that was made into, you think it's how can you make it into kind of a chilling movie? And let's see who the director of that was. Like me, I couldn't tell you. Cujo. Louis Teague. D. Wallace, Danny Pinataro, Ed Lauder, Frank Welker as Cujo, vocal effects. So yeah, it was as I said, a decent book. And again, not a overly complicated story and not an overly complicated movie. And it's decent again, and it's good for building suspense. And Louis Teague does a really good job of building up that suspense and make it interesting. But sometimes it's kind of hard to make a film about a rabid dog chasing and killing people. A lot of jump scares, a lot of attack. That's why there really hasn't been any other adaptations of it, because there's only so much you can do, and Louis Teague did it, and it was good. Number 24 is Cujo. Number 23 is, I talked about this when I talked about Storm of the Century. Number 23 is a story that was written directly for movies, was not by Stephen King, was not a short story, nor was it a script, or rather a regular novel. It was a script that he wrote directly for film, and it's called Sleepwalkers. And we see some of Stephen King again in a lot of his stuff, and in some of the earlier movies we see it. But one of the things that I haven't talked about Stephen King is he actually, while he does have a dog, he is also a cat person, because cats appear multiple times in a lot of his stories. Pet Sematary, Cat's Eye, a few others down the line. And in this one particularly, this is the big one. This is Stephen King's cat movie. And the premise is a mother and son who are like this werewolf hybrid creature thing. It's not a werewolf, but it's like a werewolf, but it's not a werewolf. Sort of hybrid creature thing moves into this town, and there seems to be sort of an incestuous relationship going between it. And he goes to school and he meets Lara Flynn Boyle, one of the other actresses from Twin Peaks, which is one of my favorite shows. Sleepwalkers. Mick Garris directed this one. He's the guy who did some of King's TV stuff. Machen Amick, okay. Machen Amick, I should say. Okay. Brian Krause, Alice Krieg, Machen Amick, Ron Perlman, Glenn Shaddix, Stephen King is in it, John Landis, Joe Dante, Clive Barker, Toby Hooper, and Mark Hamill are all in it also. So it's a 1992 film. And so Machen Amick is sort of like the virginal girl who falls in love with Brian Krause's character, and he sort of falls in love with her, but he's got this secret where they have to, I guess, it's not really suck the blood out of them, but they have to kill in order to be satiated, something like that. It's been a while since I've seen it, but the thing is, what they're most afraid of is cats, and it's their Achilles heel. And I think that's awesome. Then I think one of the climaxes has just an army of cats going up against them. It's hilarious. And it's a decent film. And Mick Garris, I think he directed The Stand, the original TV version from 1994, because Tommy Lee Wallace did it. And Mick Garris might have did Langoliers also, maybe. Regardless, but Sleepwalkers is sort of, as I said, it's like a werewolf movie, but not about sort of incestuous couple, and then the boy who falls in love with the normie, but then the mom gets jealous and starts threatening her, and she has to decide between his mom and his new girlfriend, but he's also this freak thing that has to kill people, and they're afraid of cats, and there's a mob of cats that end the movie, and how it defeats them. So yeah, and again, Stephen King has had cats pop up multiple times in a lot of his stuff, so he is a cat person, despite the fact that he owns a dog. So Sleepwalkers is number 23. Excuse me. Where are you, 22? Oh, it's right above it. Number 22 is the streaming series 11/22/63, which is a book I've been dying to read. I will be the first to admit it. I've caught only about half of this, but I know the story of it. But it is a streaming film, or show, I should say. And the basic premise is there's a portal to the past in this bar or shop or something, and this guy goes into it and is transported back in time to try to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But there are other forces at work that are trying to make sure that he doesn't, because that would screw up the timeline. And in one instance, he goes back in time almost 2 years before he has to be there, and he's sort of stuck there for 2 years, stuck in the past before he can do his mission about saving John F. Kennedy. It's a decent story. And as again, I got to read the book. I've always keep planning. I'm going to read the book around the time of the anniversary of the assassination. But here's the thing. It's another one of his almost 1,000-page books. It's massive. And I will be the first to admit, I don't read as much as I used to or should, Last time I really had a decent year of reading was 2020 when I was furloughed from work, and that's like really all I did. But they did a pretty decent adaptation of it so far from what I've seen. And I hope to maybe catch up back on that. It might be easier for me just to watch that instead of read the stuff, but I really kind of want to read the book also. But 11/22/63 again is another one of these. Yeah, it's got Stephen King-esque sort of qualities, these timekeeper creatures and time travel and interactions with people from previous ones of his book. But it's in general, in the end, it's about trying to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there's been a number of shows about that. Quantum Leap did a fantastic 2-episode thing about them trying to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And Red Dwarf did probably one of the definitive versions of stopping the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So it's a trope, but not really, because it's only happened in a little bit. But it is a theory. When somebody asks if you could travel back in time, what would you do? And a lot of people would say, I'd like to see, maybe not necessarily to stop the killing of John F. Kennedy, but to see who actually killed him, because it's the first real major conspiracy. Now, they don't really cover the conspiracy too much in the story, but I think it lingers as sort of kind of in there as sort of back thing, but it's mostly a focus more on the lead character and the stuff like that, and the stuff he's going through and what he goes through, kind of like those 2 years leading up to stopping the assassination, and then what happens after, and now he has to fix that sort of thing. So it's decent, and the adaptation from what I've seen so far is a decent adaptation. But again, it's not Stephen King-esque, much as there's been stuff that isn't Tim Burton-esque or John Carpenter-esque, but they still did it. And it's brilliant because it shows range, much like how actors are able to show range by jumping from drama to comedy to horror to sci-fi to suspense to villain, good guy, whatever, voiceover. So actors have range. Directors are also allowed to have range. Writers are also allowed to have range as well. Number 22 is 11/22/63. Number 21 is another more recent streaming one, which is a really good one also. Mr. Hannigan's Phone, which is actually based on a short story from a more recent collection of Stephen King's short stories. So, a lot of the adaptations, they're starting to delve more into more recent Stephen King stuff is becoming adapted because everything else has pretty much been done. Didn't stop Salem's Lot from doing another version of it or it, but still, because he's still writing and he still has a huge amount of stuff out there that hasn't been adapted. Particularly, a lot of his short stories aren't, which would make easy films. The Flanagan just did one of his short films. I can't remember what it's called, or short stories, which is supposed to be one of the biggest movies of next year. I think it's already hit like film festivals, and it's got Tom Hiddleston in it and Karen Gillan, and it's been getting rave reviews. But there's, from what I recall, it's not set to be released wide this year because here we are, October 23rd, and I haven't heard. It's been viewed, but I haven't heard when it's set to come out. But Mr. Hannigan's Phone, as I said, is one of those, and I think it's got is it Donald Sutherland's one of his last roles? No, it's not that. It's Mr. Harrigan. I'm sorry. Not Hannigan. Harrigan. Harrigan's Phone. John Lee Hancock directed it. Yeah, it's one of Donald Sutherland's last films. And it's about, a older gentleman who strikes up a friendship with a young kid, and the older gentleman, and they each get like an iPhone, and the older gentleman dies and he's buried with the iPhone, and then the boy starts getting phone calls from Mr. Harrigan on the iPhone. So it's that's more of a Stephen King sort of thing, and it's actually a pretty decent. It's on Netflix, I think. So check that out definitely. A simple sort of little. Netflix is really good at having. There's another Netflix one on here a little ways down the road. And it's always good to have something where you don't know exactly what you want to do, and you see something that sounds interesting, and you see Mr. Harrigan's Phone. It's a Stephen King story, and so you know what you're in for. And John Lee Hancock is not a bad director either. And I think it's I think it might be Donald Sutherland's last role that he did before he passed away. Don't quote me on that, but the film's recent. I think it came out last year or 2 years ago, something like that. But it's decent. That's why it's number 21. I really enjoyed it a lot, and it's as I said, kind of a typical sort of Stephen King book story, which is great. And again, one of his short stories, which probably have a better, as I said before, are better adapted than his longer form stories. Now, looking ahead, I can't think of it right now, but we have the Tom Hiddleston movie. That's based on a short story. We've got The Monkey coming out next year by the guy who did Longlegs for this year. And I think Elijah Wood's in it also. That's from one of his really, really early short film things. And then there's something else I just had in my head. There's another. Fairy Tale has been picked up for a TV series, which is one of his more recent books. And The Talisman has been picked up by the guys who did Stranger Things. That they're wrapping up Stranger Things. Once they finish that, they're going to start working on the Talisman series, because that's 2 books that they can really, it's going to be a series. They can really delve into that. That's, as I said, both The Talisman and Black House, which is the sequel to it, are so massive. And there's so much going on, and it exactly fits the role of the guys who do Stranger Things. That's one I'm looking forward to, though. But we're probably not going to see it till at the earliest 2026, 2027, probably, which sucks. But if they do it right, it could go almost 5 seasons, probably, just like Stranger Things does. You got the Duffer Brothers. That's who does. It could probably go 5 seasons because there's just so much to both The Talisman and Black House. And there's, as I said, they're both like close to like 1,000 pages, 800, 900 here and there. So you're looking at close to 1,700 pages of stuff you can draw from, and you can probably do 5 might be a little heavy, but at least a 3 to 4 season if the show's successful. And you get the Duffer Brothers involved. That's great. So that's why streaming is good, because Mr. Harrigan's Phone, I think they might have released it in limited theaters, but if they didn't have streaming and this released in theater, it probably wouldn't do that well. Yeah, it's Stephen King, but not every Stephen King adaptation is a hit. And even then, even this, it's one of his short stories, not one of his more well-known ones. It might not even have got made itself, but that's really a shame because it's actually very good, and that's why it's number 21. Number 20 is Cat's Eye. I think this one is again one that he wrote directly for movies, and it's an anthology series, 3 stories, and it follows a cat who weaves in and out of all the stories. And so it's a really interesting. You basically get 3 different movies in one movie, and the only things I can remember is that I think Drew Barrymore's in one of the stories. I know Robert Hayes from Airplane is in one of the stories. And I remember the last one is because he's like a stray cat who in the first 2 is trying to find a home. And he finally finds a home in the 3rd story. And the mother is a little wary about the cat because she's heard the old wives' tales that cats actually go and suck the life out of human children. So she's afraid of the cat being in the same room as her son because she's afraid the cat's going to suck the life out of them. And then when weird things start to happen in the boy's bedroom, she starts to get even more suspicious. But it turns out that what's going on, and again, in fully Stephen King sort of thing, a small little troll creature is trying to kill the boy, and the cat is protecting him. But in ways that it makes it look like that, because who would believe a small little troll thing? The little boy knows it's true, but who's going to believe a little boy about a small little troll thing that we actually see and that the cat's protecting the boy from? So, but it's always fun when you see an anthology series. So you get 3 different takes, and the cat, as I said, doesn't really play much of a role in the first 2, but does make appearances and is there for some of the major bits in there. Again, another one I haven't seen in a while. I think this was during the period where my family had cable and we had HBO, and HBO didn't have enough movies to fill, so they would pull films and show them like 3 times a day. I think that's how I saw Cat's Eye. And as I said, the one that, and maybe it's, and that might be the last time I actually saw it because I don't remember if I've seen it recently. So maybe that's why, because the 3rd story was the thing that just got to me so much that I kind of remember Robert Hayes like hanging from the outside of a balcony or something like that is the other thing. But I do remember they are good stories, and it's fun to see an anthology every once in a while, and they should do more of that actually. So, well, we got to get moving. It's 52 minutes in, and we're only on number 19. Number 19 is Dr. Sleep. Mike Flanagan strikes again. Again, when you find something you like and you're really good at it, Frank Darabont was sort of similar to that as well with Green Mile, Shawshank, and The Mist, doing those Stephen King things. And now Flanagan's that new thing where he's did he's doing the Carrie one, he's doing the Dark Tower, and this is his big thing right now. So and the one with Tom Hiddleston. And this is the big one, though. Dr. Sleep is the one, which is the sequel to The Shining. I haven't read the book. I have it. I think I read maybe the first chapter because I have read The Shining multiple times. I enjoy The Shining. I like it. But the movie's actually pretty decent, and it didn't obviously get the acclaim that The Shining did because it's not really, we can't really talk about because The Shining is a whole another thing in general. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So we'll cover that. But there is a difficult thing about creating a sequel to The Shining because first came the book and then King wrote the sequel in book form. But the most popular movie version of The Shining is one that Stephen King is not a fan of and totally kind of changes everything about it. But we'll talk about that down the line. So Dr. Sleep has the unenviable task of trying to not only be a sequel to the book, but also to Kubrick's version of the film, because that's how the majority of people remember The Shining. Most people probably haven't read The Shining. They've seen the Kubrick movie, and maybe some more of them have seen the TV version of it. But most people know The Shining from Kubrick. And so Mike Flanagan had to juggle that a little bit, and he does a decent job with that. I mean, Ewan McGregor, you can't go wrong with that. Decent cast in it, if I recall correctly. And also, that's another thing also, is he likes to work with, sort of similar people. Who's he got cast here? Ewan McGregor, Rebecca Ferguson, Carl Lumley, Bruce Greenwood, who's awesome. Cliff Curtis, Carol Stroiken, who awesome. Jacob Tremblay, Henry Thomas, another Mike Flanagan sort of regular. But it basically pays homage to kind of all versions of The Shining, and does it successfully. But unfortunately, it came out the year before COVID hit, so it didn't really get the acclaim that maybe it should have, but it's still a decent atmospheric sort of film. I want to read the book because I read the Shining, and I have it on my table. And as I said, I think I read the first chapter, but just stopped. But the movie, is fairly decent. And, granted, maybe that's one of the downsides to watching the movie first before you read the book. But I've done that for a lot of Stephen King stuff. And then there's some that I read the book first and then watch the movie in the show. But Dr. Sleep is definitely well worth it. I think you could maybe even call it an underrated film because not a lot of people talk about it. It is a decent sequel because it doesn't really imitate what the previous movie did. Number 18. Where are you? There you are, right in front of my face. Dead Zone. Now, the interesting about the Dead Zone is it was a movie with Christopher Walken and Martin Sheen. Again, mid-'80s, one of the early Stephen King books that, again, is not a high-concept story, but has sort of that supernatural Stephen King edge. And it's those smaller stories, the Cujos, the Carries, the Christines, the Dead Zones, the Shining, are the ones that got people interested in reading Stephen King because, let's face facts, those are all kind of short novels. And people go to the beach and they sit and they read books. They go on vacation, they sit and they read books. They go on airplane trips, they read books, boat trips, whatever. You do other stuff, obviously, but there's going to be a lot of downtime and a lot of stuff, and a lot of people bring books. I always brought books when we went to the beach. My mother-in-law reads like 10 books during a week at work at the beach because we spend all day at the beach, but she doesn't go in the water all that much. She does when her grandkids were little, she would go and hang out in the wood, but she didn't go all the way in, and she'd hang out with the grandkids. But there'd be times where she'd just be sitting there and she'd be reading. And then, every night we had a different family would prep dinner and she didn't have to. So she would sit out on the deck with some wine or beer and she would read and read at night, when we're not doing stuff. And Dead Zone is one of those stories which, late 70s to early 80s, as I said, these small, short ones is what built up Stephen King's popularity. And then the movies came out very soon after the books came out because the books were popular and the movies came out. And the movies were, for the most part, pretty popular as well. And again, not a high concept. Christopher Walken plays a guy who, when he touches somebody, can see the future. He touches a senator's hand and sees that he's actually going to become a horrific dictator sort of person. He's got to figure out a way to stop him without killing him, but it's the president of the United States and he is up against trouble. And that's your premise. It's a great idea for a premise. It's a wonderful, quick, easy movie, probably about an hour, 30 minutes, hour, 45 minutes, stuff like that. And it was popular enough that they made a TV show about it with Anthony Michael Hall. That was kind of after his 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird Science era, he sort of did a bunch of movies that were kind of shitty. They did a stint on SNL, which was forgettable. And Dead Zone didn't come along till the late 90s. He sort of came back into view when he appeared in Edward Scissorhands back in early 92. Or I'm sorry, 91, because 92 is Batman Forever. Or Batman Returns. 91. No, it was 1990 because he needed a year in between stuff to do stuff. So it was 1990 was when he was in Edward Scissorhands. And that sort of brought him to attention. So in the mid-90s, USA Network needed to fill some time in their network, so they created a TV show based on the Dead Zone. Anthony Michael Hall portraying the role of Christopher Walken, who, when he touched somebody, he sees their psychic, see what's going to happen to them and has to try to either help them or stop them. And God damn it, if that's not a great premise for a TV show, because, again, the story that King wrote was, to stop a dictator president from, he's not a dictator yet, but he will be in the future, and needs to stop him from becoming a dictator. So that's just one story. So he's successful with that. So then you go on and you touch somebody else, and then they have another issue, and you go and you try to solve that. It makes perfect sense to be a procedural, and it was a hugely successful show, and wasn't quite the renaissance for Anthony Michael Hall, but when you say Dead Zone, a lot of people forget there was a movie with Christopher Walken in it because the TV show was so hugely popular. So I have both of them. As I said at the beginning of the show, I'm going to do where they have multiple adaptations of something. I'm going to put them together and say that it works both ways. Dead Zone TV series. First aired in 2002. So how many seasons did it last? But as I said, it makes perfect sense for procedural. He helps someone new every week trying to do something. Or you could do a one story through every season. It lasted 6 seasons, so you gotta give credit to that. And then David Cronenberg ends up I forgot he directed the movie version of it. Christopher Walken, Brooke Adams, Tom Skerritt, Martin Sheen, Anthony Zerbe, Colleen Dewhurst. Yeah, so it's a really good idea. And again, simple, not too complicated, and spun off to a fairly popular 6 seasons. When you do 6 seasons of a show, that isn't a fluke, particularly in the early 2000s on like a UPN or a USA network, So kudos for whoever came up with the idea. It's like, you know what? It's a procedural. So Dead Zone, both the movie and the TV show, is in at number 18. Probably should put it higher because it's actually decent. 17 is Apt Pupil. So King writes short stories, he writes novels, and he writes novellas, and he collects them. 4 Past Midnight is one of those where there's 4 books. Langoliers is in that one, I think. But they're not short stories, but they're not novels. So like the short story might be like, 20, 25 pages. Novel could be anywhere between like 400 and 1,000 pages. The novella is probably in that sweet spot between like 80 and 100, maybe 150 pages at the most. So you get a little bit. It's not quite a short story, but not quite a full novel. And novellas are really great. And as I said, he's dropped a bunch of short story books and a bunch of novellas. 4 Past Midnight is one of those. Different Seasons is the other one. And Different Seasons is probably the best one because Different Seasons brought you Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me, and Apt Pupil. Apt Pupil, again, is not a horror movie per se, directed by Bryan Singer before his issues, and starring a little actor named Ian McKellen. And with Bryan Singer directing it, I wonder why he picked Ian McKellen, because A, Ian McKellen is an amazing actor, but B, Singer just worked with him on X-Men. And I forget the kid who was played by the kid from The Client. I forget the actor's name. I'm not even going to look it up. It doesn't matter to me because it's about Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen is phenomenal actor, and he did Magneto. Bryan Singer liked his Magneto, so they made At Pupil together. And then he went off and did a little movie called Lord of the Rings. So you get Ian McKellen, Bryan Singer directed, who's coming off of Usual Suspects. And the story of a kid who discovers that his elderly next door neighbor is a former Nazi commandant who worked at what do you call them? Oh, Jesus, my mind. The Holocaust places, concentration camps, and had ease about killing people because he's evil. And I think the boy finds out about him and threatens to like sue him or blackmails him to help him do things, or else he's going to reveal his location to the United States, who kind of been trying to catch all of these Nazis who escaped, who should be held accountable for all the deaths they had. But he's not stupid, and he kind of turns the tables on him. It's a very great, tense movie. Fantastic. The kid who was in The Client, God, it's going to kill me. I need to tell it, but he's actually a decent actor, and he's like doesn't do anything anymore, which is a shame. Actually, I don't need that. I keep going here, but I just need to go to Wikipedia. But the fact that 3 amazing stories came from one collection is Brad Renfro. Okay. Is outstanding. So yeah, so such a great casting, great story. Again, not a horror movie per se, but let's look at different seasons. When you look at Shawshank and Stand By Me, which is called The Body in that, and then this one, none are really overtly supernatural. There are aspects that could be, well, not aspects, but the go to find the dead body and the body, that's not a supernatural thing. People die all the time. And if you happen to know where there's a body, hey, let's go check it out. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But At Pupil is one of those, again, films that probably no one knows about. But you have Bryan Singer at the top of his game after doing Usual Suspects and before he became, and X-Men, and before he became a complete and utter lunatic. And then you have Brad Renfro coming off The Client, also doing a really good job acting-wise too. Actually, it might be before Magneto. Now I think about it, I got to check that out now, because I thought At Pupil came out after, but it could have been before. 1998, it was before. Okay. I'll take that. So this is actually Ian McKellen's kind of his introduction to the world. And it makes sense because Usual Suspect was like 95. And then Client was around that time also, 95, 96 also. So it makes sense to have them in 98 and before the X-Men. But that's probably what made him go, you know what? You'd be a damn good Magneto. So, and then you could play the other side. But At Pupil, again, is definitely, if you haven't checked it out yet, is one of those, again, sort of like a Shawshank and a Stand By Me, that it's Stephen King, but not really. Number 16 is Pet Sematary, all adaptations of, well, maybe not the part 2, stuff like that, but there was the most recent one that came out a couple years ago, and then the original one. Pet Sematary, again, is such a fantastic idea, and another one of those early to mid 80 films before he really started getting into the heaviness, and the verbal diarrhea really got really strong and really bad. Premise, again, so simple. New family moves to a town. They've got young children. They meet their neighbor who talks about this bizarre, or they discover this bizarre little cemetery in the middle of the woods that appears to be where people bury their dead pets. But then something happens. The little boy dies, gets hit by a car. A baby gets hit by, he's a toddler, I should say, gets hit by a car. And they bury him in the pet cemetery, but there's something in the ground there that brings him back to life and makes them evil. Again, cats in the story, but it's such a great idea, a place of concentrated evil, where if you bury somebody or put someone in there and they come back evil, even though they're alive, they're evil. It's a great idea. And both versions, I think, did really, really well. The original was a classic, and the new version actually was a decent revival of it. Now I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit because I'm looking at the time. I only got about 45 minutes to get through the list. I think I'll be able to, but I need to sort of stop my own verbal diarrhea. But Pet Sematary, again, number 16. Again, a great idea for a story. One of the things that cemented his place as a great writer and one who writes creepy stuff. And it works. Number 15 finds the Langoliers. As I mentioned before, during the era of TV adaptations of it, the TV adaptations being so successful, they started just adapting whatever. The Langoliers, I think, was one of the novellas in 4 Past Midnight. And again, high concept idea, a novella, so it's not a long-ass novel, nor is it a short story, but it's a general. And again, it's more of a science fiction sort of film than it is a horror film. Come on down, bud. That's okay. Your ice cream is in the refrigerator. But the premise is great. A bunch of disparate people on an airplane packed to the gills with people, as most airplanes are. They fly into this weird sort of cloud with electricity, electrical storm cloud or whatever, and they're like knocked unconscious. And then when they wake up, there's only like 7 or 8, including a pilot, 7 or 8 people on the plane. Everybody else has disappeared off of it. So one of the pilots takes over and they're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. So they land in a weirdly quiet airport, because normally airports are extraordinarily busy. They run 24/7, planes coming in and out, people in and out all the time. There's nobody around, no planes coming in or out, no people in the airport milling about, nobody working in the airport. And it's really gets even more crazy. And then they start hearing these weird sounds, which they don't know what they are. And then eventually they discover what's going on. They have found themselves trapped in sort of a time construct, really. So like the past, so they somehow have been sent to the past, just those 7 or 8 people, but the airplane with the rest of the people is still flying, that sort of thing. They didn't disappear. These 9 people fell out of time because apparently there's residues of time, and the noises they're hearing are the Langoliers, which are these creatures that eat time. And that's just a fucked up idea. But it kind of works because the story itself is so creative. So they did a 2-part miniseries with a bunch of TV actors and stuff like that. Bronson Pinchot plays a bad guy who you never expect that. David Morse, who usually plays bad guys, was the good guy in this. And they have to try to find a way to get back into their present time and get back, where everybody else is. Patricia Wettig, Dean Stockwell, David Morse, Mark Lindsay Chapman, Frankie Faison, Bronson Pinchot. So directed by Tom Holland did this one. Okay. So again, it's such a great premise, and I forget how they figure out what's going on. They have to figure out but they have to stay ahead of the Langoliers, and just having a completely empty airport and just having people disappear in midair is just kind of a freaky sort of idea. And again, having creatures that eat time is really, so Langoliers is actually a really good story. And it was a decent, again, version of the film. So, or the story, I should say. Again, novella. So again, one of Stephen King's weaknesses is his endings. Novella, short stories, he can kind of wrap things up a little bit easier, stuff like that, and they're a little bit better. So that was number 15, right? Yep, number 14. I'm going to talk about this one for a while. This is Gerald's Game. Now, Gerald's Game is another one of these really weird. Stephen King wrote that books, but it also has a connection to Dolores Claiborne, which is, and the Dark Tower in the book as well. Those two, Dolores Claiborne particularly, but that's stuff. But here's the premise. Again, did Flanagan direct this one also? I think he did. I honestly think Flanagan directed this one too. I think this is like the first one he did. I'm almost 100% certain Flanagan did this one also. Yeah, Mike Flanagan, 2017. That's what I thought. Carla Gugino. And Bruce Greenwood, who I love. And even Carol Stroiken is in it from Twin Peaks. And you even get Henry Thomas in flashbacks. Gerald's Game is weird. The weird setup for a story. Again, not really a Stephen King book, but again, kind of. Carl Gugino and Bruce Greenwood are a married couple. They're older, so they're like probably my age. And like I guess the kids are aware. I don't even remember if they have kids or if he's like her second husband or something like that. But they're spending some time away, and Bruce Greenwood is horny, and he wants to play some sex games with Carla Gugino, who's really not up for it, but she's trying to, I guess their marriage is kind of on the rocks, and she's trying to keep their marriage together. And she's not really in the mood for his sex games, but she gives into it. So in the book, she's topless through the whole story. They couldn't do that, obviously, even for a Netflix movie, even though it'd been lovely. I'm sorry, that's a bad thing to say. Carla Gugino is a gorgeous woman and gorgeous body. So they decide to do a sex games. So they go to this this like cabin. It's not in the woods. It's like it's by the water or whatever. But it's so far out of the way that there's like the nearest neighbor is like miles away. So it's very isolated, and it's a good way for them to get back to romancing and stuff like that. And then the culmination of the night that she promised, because she wants to keep their marriage together, is that she would be handcuffed to the bedpost and allow Bruce Greenwood to play his sex game he wants to do, where he wants to sort of be a guy who, I think that the role playing is that she's a girl that he is holding hostage, and he's the criminal who's holding her hostage and like wants to rape her, I guess, is kind of the thing. But because it is role play and because they are married and she did consent to it, it's a game, even though it's a sick game that someone has a fantasy of raping their wife. And eventually it doesn't work for her, and she's trying to get him to stop, and he just won't. And then she like kicks him in the face to get him off of her. And then he starts losing it on her. And then all of a sudden he clutches his chest and dies of a heart attack. And there's your premise. He's dead of a heart attack. She's handcuffed to a bedpost. The key is in the bathroom, I think, and she can't get up. And the nearest neighbor is miles away. So there's your premise. Carla Gugino has to try to figure out a way to survive and escape without, with nobody around to help her. It is a Carla Gugino's movie. She is in 100% of the movie, but it's not the entirety of the story. Now, that alone would be an interesting story, but they decided to, King decided to king it up a little bit by doing a few different things. One, when she starts suffering from not having enough food, enough water, she starts to hallucinate her dead husband is now alive, walking around, talking to her, and they're having conversations, and he's being a total dickwad about everything. 2, wild dogs somehow get their way into the house and start eating her dead husband, and she can't do anything about it. And then she's also afraid that they might just be hanging around because after they eat him, they might eat her because she's going to be dead too soon. And she don't want to get eaten by dogs. She's able to scare them away somehow, or they go away on their own accord. That alone would make the story even more crazy and be like, okay, that's cool. But then Stephen King says, not done yet. There also just so happens to be a psycho killer out there who goes around and kills people in their houses. There's been like 2 or 3, it's almost a serial killer, 3 or 4 people like that, called the Starlight Killer or something like that. And so Carla Gugino is trapped in bed, handcuffed like this. That's going to fuck up your arms and your wrists. In the book, she's topless, but in the movie, she's got all she's got on is, she probably has no panties on, but she's got a nice night dress on or whatever like that. And she hasn't had water or food, and she's hallucinating, and she starts hearing more sounds, like walking around, and sees a massive black shape like watching her like all night almost, and she's talking to it, but it's not answering her, and she doesn't know if she is hallucinating or if this could be the killer. She's not sure. And the mask isn't doing anything. Maybe moves forward apparently, but she can't see his face. So then it goes to the next day, and she's still trapped, and now she's got to try to figure out what to do because she's dying of thirst and hunger. And the dogs keep coming back and keep eating the dead husband. And she's got to figure out a way how to do it. And then what adds more interest to it is there's flashbacks to when she was sexually abused by her father during a solar eclipse, which is the same solar eclipse in Dolores Claiborne, where Dolores Claiborne kills her abusive husband. And in the books, they have a vision of each other. And then the Dark Tower is they have a vision of that as well. So again, King likes to pop things into his books. Now they don't do that. I can't remember. I think there might have been a sequence where she saw an old lady in shadow as she's remembering her flashback during the solar eclipse when her father is like sexually abusing her. That's the movie, is how does she escape? And is this mask that keeps visiting her every night, is it the killer? I love Gerald's Game. It's a good one. And it's a well done film also. I mean, there's only so much you could do, and Carla Gugino absolutely kills it. And Bruce Greenwood is perfect as the sleazy asshole husband. Number 13 is Carrie. They've had a couple of remakes of it as well, but the original one with Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie is fantastic. The Pig's Blood, John Travolta's in it as well. It's the first book he wrote was Carrie, and the first movie adaptation of his work was also Carrie, I think. And everyone knows the iconic Pig's Blood sequence being poured on her at the end. And the Stephen King-esque quality about it is that she is a young girl who is about to hit puberty and have her first period. So she's already considered a freak because her mom is this brutal, hugely religious a-hole. And she doesn't have any friends, and they pick on her and bully her and stuff like that. But then when she has her puberty moment, she finds out she has psychic abilities where she can move stuff with her mind. Now, it's funny. A lot of these early things seem like Stephen King was writing the X-Men. We have Jean Grey here and Carrie. You've got Firestarter who can control fire with her mind as well. And so it's kind of funny to think about that. But this is his first book. And I believe his first movie came out very soon after the book. The book was a huge sensation, huge hit. The movie was a huge sensation, huge hit, and it sent him on his way. And the story that he always tells is that if it wasn't for his wife Tabitha, he wouldn't be Stephen King. Meaning he had wrote Carrie, thought it was garbage, threw it in the garbage. Tabitha pulled it out, read it, said, "You're a fucking idiot. You need to, publish this. This is actually decent." And she might give him some notes about how to rewrite it, and he does. And she kind of makes him publish it, and the rest is history. But the movie itself it's uncomfortable to watch because the story is uncomfortable. And it's something that a lot of people go through. I was bullied when I was younger. Granted, I wasn't a woman, and I can only imagine how much harder that is to be bullied as a girl than it is to be bullied as a boy. And this was like every nightmare I've ever had of being bullying and not having the psychic ability to fight back. But the pig's blood sequence is iconic. PJ Souls, who goes on to do Halloween the year later, is also in the movie. John Travolta and right around his Saturday Night Fever Welcome Back Kotter aspect is there too. Piper Laurie is absolutely creepy, disgusting as the mom. And Sissy Spacek does a great job. So they've done a more recent adaptation of it. It was updated in like 2000, early 2000s. That one I hadn't seen. That's why I didn't add it to the list. I saw the Dead Zone show. I didn't watch all 6 seasons of the Dead Zone show, but I watched some of it. And the Pet Sematary ones, I've seen both of those. So you get kind of where I'm going with this. But with Carrie, I didn't see the new version of it. I didn't see the sequels of it. And Mike Flanagan doing a limited series version of Carrie is intriguing, but I kind of wish he would do Dark Tower because I think he would do it justice. But that being said, when and if that comes out, that might be an interesting look at to see what's going on about. But Carrie is number 13, and it's really an interesting way to look into early Stephen King to see what set him on his path, and don't know quite where he veered off at. Number 12 is Salem's Lot. Again, this one has had multiple iterations, including one that just got released. Now, I haven't watched the one that just got released yet because it's on Max, and I don't have Max. But I saw a trailer. It looks fantastic. There was an early 2000 TV miniseries with a great cast. Rob Lowe, Andre Braugher was decent. Wasn't great, but it was decent. And then the original was actually a 4-hour miniseries also, but I don't remember that much. I don't remember where I saw it, but I know I saw it. And that's Toby Hooper directed that. So it's vampires. It's his first foray into vampires. I think it's the first book where he writes about a supernatural sort of character, creature that he didn't create of his own accord or make a spin on as well. But Salem's Lot it's a vampire film, a vampire story. And it's, again, a fairly decent, a fairly decent, my son's printing something out, I guess, a decent vampire story that you have to admit, if you watch Midnight Mass, kind of influenced it, Leave me out here, kid. No, it's fine. It's coming out. Oh, no, not yet. I'm going to finish up down here at the bottom. How many pages? Okay. Yeah, it says printing. All right. That's my son. So that's number 12, Salem's Lot. This first foray, as I said, into a vampire story. Early book, one of the early adaptations out there. Pretty decent, pretty good story. What are you laughing at? You want to dry your hand here? Come on. Number 11 is, I talk about vampires. 11 is Silver Bullet. That's werewolves. But the thing is, his book that it's based on is not called Silver Bullet. It's called Cycle of the Werewolf. And Cycle of the Werewolf is one of the more interesting books in Stephen King's writing ability, because it's kind of a short story, but it's also a novel, but it's also a novella because it's only like 12 pages long. And not 12 pages, like 20, 25 pages long. But it was both supposedly set as originally a buddy of his wanted a calendar about, oops. Wanted a calendar and wanted that he got the great horror comic book artist Bernie Wrightson to draw the pictures for, and wanted Stephen King to write a story to go along with Bernie Wrightson's pictures. So Stephen King came with the idea of the cycle of the werewolf, which each chapter is 12 chapters, and one is a month of the year, and it correlates with one of Bernie Wrightson's pictures. So Bernie Wrightson draws a picture, King writes a story about the picture, and then makes it as part of a big story. So then February comes in, there's another Bernie Wrightson picture, but he continues the story, but making it for each month, because remember, the werewolf has a cycle. Full moon happens, it becomes werewolf. So it is an ongoing cycle. Silver Bullet is actually one of these decent, again, sort of underrated movies that not a lot of people know about. And pretty decent cast. Corey Haim, Gary Busey, and a not so weird role. He's actually usually a weird dude. Okay. So he's still printing some more here, looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll get it up to you. I'm almost done anyway. But again, it's funny. He's another Twin Peaks actor is in it. So he's like 3 or 4 actors who've been in Twin Peaks have been in Stephen King adaptations as well. That's the guy who plays Big Ed. I forget the actor's name, but he is in this film as well. But it's a great book because it's once a month, and there's usually holidays, stuff like that. So the story is usually set around the holiday that is specific to that month. And the story, as I said, it's supposed to be about a calendar, and then each one is a story about the picture that Bernie Wrightson had. But it's a story that is the same character, stuff like that. So it's just the year in the life of this character, and as it builds and builds and builds, and then we get to the end. It's really, and it's actually was a pretty decent adaptation. Obviously, there's never a straight up adaptation of stuff, but Silver Bullet has a pretty decent shot of being one of the better adaptations of. That would be better. Of Stephen King's work. All right, so here we are, an hour and a half in. We're at the top 10. Let's see if we can get this done by 10 o'clock. We got half an hour, so let's start moving on here. Number 10, as I talked about, oh God, I just said his name. I can't think of it now. Give me a second. Frank Darabont, thank you. I'm able to do it before I had to look it up. Frank Darabont, as I said, was the first Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan does all these adaptations of Stephen King's work. Darabont did a bunch of them as well. And The Mist is not the first one he did. The first one he did was Shawshank. But The Mist is the last one he did. And The Mist is actually one of Stephen King's best short stories that you could conceivably probably have expanded it enough and turned it into a novel, but he didn't. He turned it, it's almost a novella, but not quite as much. And he did expand it for the movie because again, as I said, it doesn't, it has an ending, but it's very ambiguous, and it doesn't really have the gut punch that the movie ending has. So Darabont changed up the movie ending a little bit, but the premise is really a great idea. Hot summer day, family living up in Maine and stuff like that. The dad and his son need to take a trip to the grocery store get some groceries. The wife and mother wants to stay at home and just sort of relax, clean the house, do whatever. So like, we'll be back very shortly. They do this all the time. And they go to the grocery store, and it's packed with people like grocery stores are, when all of a sudden a bizarre mist appears, a massive mist that overtakes the entire town. And the people in the grocery store are trying to say, this is weird. I never thought about that, but they didn't really think much about, hey, why don't we just, it's a mist. It's we have this all the time, never quite to this extent, but it's not that big of a deal. So people try to venture out, and then they get grabbed. Something's in the mist, creatures, and you hear weird noises. So now they're freaking out now. So there's some creatures or something here in the mist, and they're trapped in the grocery store, and they've got to figure out a way to escape and also to not allow the creatures in. And that's your premise. And again, the movie follows the general same premise. I can't recall. I don't think he has an affair like he did in the book, which is weird that happened anyway. And that was one of the things I didn't like about the story. But I'm trying to remember because, again, I haven't seen The Mist in a while. But I don't think he did because it doesn't make sense. Thomas Jane, Andre Braugher, and Darabont, a lot of his guys that he always works with. Actress plays Carol's in it also. Let me get you the cast here. It's a pretty decent cast. 2007, Frank Darabont. Thomas Jane, Marcia Gay Harden, Laurie Holden from Walking Dead, Andre Braugher, Toby Jones, William Sadler, Jeffrey DeMunn from Walking Dead. William Sadler was in Shawshank. Francis Sternhagen, who seems to be in Stephen King movies as well. Sam Witwer, who is one of Darabont's guys, was also in Walking Dead. Alexa Davalos, Nathan Gamble, Chris Owen, not the Chris Owens, but the other Chris Owen. Melissa McBride, as we all know, is Carol. It's a great cast. It's a great movie, and I love the fact that if you get the Blu-ray or even the DVD, I think they released on DVD also, Darabont wanted to do it as a black and white film also. So there are two versions of the film on the Blu-ray. You can get the black and white version, and you can get the color version. And the black and white version is pops, man. It's so cool. But that's this premise. You're trapped in a grocery store, surrounded by this fog with strange creatures in it. You have no idea what's happening. They're trying to get in to get you, and you don't know what's happening. It's something that never happens to you. So you're losing your free mind. And as I said, I don't want to talk about the ending because if you haven't seen it, the ending of the movie is such a gut punch. Whereas the books just are like open-ended, like, okay. The movie has a literal, no, it's not literal because no one gets punched in the gut, but it hits you hard. And it's so good. And that's why, we miss Darabont. Ninth, we have the one that's going to probably take up the most of the time to talk about is The Shining. I read the book, love the book. I don't like Stanley Kubrick. There are parts of the movie he made that are okay, but it's not The Shining. It takes the general idea of The Shining and sort of turns it into Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, which I guess is maybe, what you wanted when you're directing it. You want to do your version of it and not necessarily Stephen King, but Stephen King kind of wanted to have an adaptation of the book because the story's all there. Why do you need to throw in this extra stuff that's not need to do either? But as I said, the majority of the story is pretty much the same. And it's, again, a good story, and the story behind it is great. There's a hotel, the Overlook Hotel up in Colorado, which is haunted, and there's a specific room in there. And I think Stephen King stayed in the room, and he couldn't last. He said, fuck this. And I think he either left the Overlook or he went to another room. But he was walking around the grounds, noticed that this overlook hotels in the middle of the mountains. There's like one road in and out. And he started having the idea of the spirit in this room that he encountered. It was the gist of this. But what would happen if there was a winter caretaker where they shut down the hotel during the winter because it's impassable, so nobody can go up there to stay, but they need to have it keep running so that when spring thaw comes and they can open up for good, it's still Noah, it's done. I thought it was. Hold on. Yeah, it is. 3, 2, 1. There you go. There you go, bud.
Thank you.
Yep. Don't forget to add it to the ones you already have.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine, bud. Don't worry about it. So the idea is there's a winter caretaker, though no one can stay at the hotel in the winter because it's impassable. Because in the middle of the mountains, it snows all the time, and there's only one road in and out. And it's uphill, and it's not worth it. But they need to keep it running to keep it going, and it's historic and all that stuff. It needs to keep things going, and it takes more than just there is a caretaker, but there needs to be more than one person there to do all the work that needs to be done. And they have to realize you're going to be snowed in here for 6 months. I mean, not 6 months, but 3 months. It's going to be dark. There's going to be nobody around, and there's not a lot to do. And he's like, I want to write a book, so this is going to be perfect, blah, 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 but I'm not doing my regular stuff. And then sure enough, as soon as he gets up there, he starts, the place is haunted, and the ghosts start tormenting him and make him remember times when he was a drunken a-hole who accidentally abused his kid, but they're trying, he wasn't trying to, but still, you abuse your kid, you got to deal with the consequences. And he and his wife are having their issues, stuff like that. But all these spirits are trying to have him they want to bring him into their fold and have them just have him as being part of the spirit family there. And it drives him mad because, as again, you're in a overlook hotel with only like 3 other people in it and nothing else to do in the middle of the cold winter and the dark and stuff like that. So it's enough to absolutely drive you absolutely bonkers. So the movie, to be fair, it's shot very well because that's what Kubrick does. And Jack Nicholson is good. Shelley Duvall is always good. Scatman Crothers, I think, is the other character in there as well. But it's just that I like the book and I like what they do with the book, but Kubrick just said, fuck the book. I'll do the general plot, but I want to add my own little shit to it. And I guess it's understandable, but it's a really good book. And maybe I'm giving it too much shit because I'm not a big fan of any of other Kubrick stuff really that much. I think he's highly overrated and everybody talks about how great he is. And maybe that's coloring some of my viewpoints on stuff. But the fact that Stephen King absolutely loathes this version of it should tell you miles of what's going on. Should be very telling. And so Stephen King decided, I've been having success with these TV adaptations, so why don't I do a TV adaptation where I can control the stuff? So he writes the adaptation for it, and they do TV, and it's okay. Rebecca De Mornay and the dude from Wings, can't think of his name right now, the redheaded guy. And it's decent, but it's not. It doesn't have like the intensity that the Kubrick version has. Or one more. It's 10 minutes to 10, okay? So it's not, it's Stephen King got what he wanted with the TV adaptation, but again, a TV adaptation that he can't really do too much because of the TV stuff. And I've always liked Rebecca De Mornay. She's one of my celebrity crushes in the 80s. And so it's good to see Stephen Wright. That's the actor. And he was okay too, but the Nicholson Duvall Kubrick version just overshadowed it, and it's not a great adaptation, but it's Steven's version of it, and he actually does connect closer to the book. And it is like a 4-hour adaptation, I think, or 6 hours. It was like 2 or 3 day thing, and it's decent. And again, maybe I need to rewatch the Kubrick one, and maybe I'm being caught because I just don't like any of Kubrick's stuff really that much. There are aspects of Doctor Strangelove I like, and Jeremiah Johnson and stuff like that, but still, it's just I don't know. I don't like when you have these cinema guys that just absolutely fawn all over somebody, and I just find them decent. I don't know, but maybe that's my thing. But The Shining is still a good story, and the adaptations are still decent, but it's hard to compare them because one overshadows the other, and one might not be as good as the other, but it's the one that is the more authentic one. It's a weird little thing. Number 8 is another hotel, but this is a hotel room, and it's a one-man band with slight support from Samuel L. Jackson. It's 1408, and this is a John Cusack movie. This is one of his short stories, Stephen King short stories about a guy who writes books that debunk hauntings and stuff like that. So he goes to this hotel in New York, and Samuel L. Jackson is the concierge and says, yes, we don't usually allow people into room 1408, which if you count the numbers 1 + 4 + 0 + 8 = 13, because of all the strange stuff that's been happening. And he's like, there's nothing going on there, because Cusack is this guy. He's a debunker. He doesn't believe anything. So he goes into the hotel room, and sure as shit, there's fucking psychological horror stuff going on in their entirety. And it is a absolutely insane film because it only takes place in that room, but all the shit that happens to Cusack is absolutely, it makes you feel like it's happening to you because you're seeing it through his eyes as well. And there's a lot of fucked up shit that's going on there. And it's a very, it's hard to describe. It's as I said, it could be a play, but there's just way too much supernatural, psychological stuff going on. And it's very unnerving because it starts creeping into you that you're seeing what he's seeing, that he's not seeing, but he is seeing it, but he's not. And it's just this whole kind of, and the direction of it is fantastic. And Cusack is wonderful in it. And it's his movie. Samuel Jackson is there for 2 seconds. And to get an actor of his caliber just to be there for like 2 seconds is crazy. Not literally 2 seconds, but he's there probably all total maybe 5 minutes in the whole movie. They do have a great scene where the two of them are talking, which is a great sequence in the film. But it's John Cusack's film. It's decent. But it's one of these things that's going to fuck you up because it's such a psychological fuck fest that it's going to fuck your head up. And that's one of the cool things about it. 1408 is number 8. Again, my time is running out here, so I got to get moving a little quicker. Number 7 is one I talked about during my Halloween shows, and I'm going to hit it real quick here. The Night Flyer, this is a film that nobody has probably ever seen before, except me, maybe. I think it was on HBO, but it never went out in movie theaters, I don't think. And it stars one of my favorite all-time, and again, Twin Peaks characters. So again, all these actors who work in Twin Peaks have also done Stephen King stuff. Miguel Ferrer, who's one of my favorite supporting actors, he takes the lead in this one, based on the short story by Stephen King about a serial murderer who apparently flies from one small plane airport to a next along the eastern seaboard. So he goes from like a bumblefuck Florida to Shitty Grove, Georgia, to small ass South Carolina. So all these little small, one landing strip place for people who have Cessnas and stuff like that, who fly their own little planes, stuff like that. And there's a pattern that someone is going up the East Coast, lands in these spots, and then a bunch of people end up being catatonic and killed. And so Miguel Ferrer plays a reporter for like one of these like schlock newspaper things to try to get the full story behind it. And he's a pilot also, so he goes in to try to follow the same course that the serial killer came, trying to figure out where he's going to end up next and be there to try to catch him in the act or see what he is or whatever. And we eventually find out that it's actually a vampire, which is funny because, vampire bats, they fly, but this one flies an airplane at night, and then he lands at one of these pumbledunk small little airports in the middle of fucking nowhere on the eastern seaboard, and spends the day in his coffin ensconced in dirt, which is what vampires do. And he's able to entrance the people who run the airports to let him just sit there. And then when their time is up, he feasts on them and flies off. The vampire styling is one of the creepiest ones I've seen, and has one of the creepiest, coolest scenes ever, where after the vampire has killed a bunch of people and sucked their blood, Miguel Ferrer is like hiding in a toilet stall, and he's watching in a mirror because he can't see the reflection of the vampires in the mirror, and all he sees is blood splatter in the urinal, like whoever's doing it is peeing blood because that's what he drank, that's what he ate, and that's his waste. And then he comes out and he comes face to face with the insane vampire, and it doesn't end how you think it does. But it's a pretty, it's, as I said, decent short story. But again, about 87 minutes to just shy of 90, just about 90 minutes. It's a quick run. It's one of these it's just a kind of, it seemed like a B sort of movie, but it's a little bit fresher than that. And it's decent, and I really enjoy it. And mainly because it's also that high up because it is Miguel Ferrer, but also because it's a decent short story with an easy easy story idea. A vampire flying from little podunk place to podunk place, feeding and moving on. It makes perfect sense. Number 6 finds us The Green Mile. Frank Darabont strikes again. This one, I love this one is that when Stephen King wrote this, and it was put in bookstores. He did it in short, like in the old days. A lot of older writers would do short stories that were serialized, and so they would serialize the newspaper. So like one chapter would be in one week newspaper, and the next week would be the next chapter. Dickens did that. Stuff like that. So Stephen King wanted to get back to that, but instead of doing it serialized in newspaper, he wanted to send it out to a place where everybody could get it. So he wrote these small chapter books. So each, I think it was like a total of like 8 books that were about 40 pages long, might have had a chapter or 2 in it that followed the story of the Green Mile. And it would come out like every couple weeks or something like that. So I had to go to Barnes & Noble every couple weeks to get the next one and read it. And it's so good. The serialized format fits perfectly for the story. It's set in the South in the 1960s about a black man who is a big, tall mountain man who looks threatening, but is a puppy dog who, in racist South, is believed to have killed 2 young white girls. So he gets thrown into prison where he is sentenced to death by electric chair. So he goes to Green Mile, which is death row, and you meet the characters, the other people who are on death row, the officers who work it, the one asshole officer who's trying to get promotions but is stuck in that area and wants to get out, but he's a dick to everybody. And you have Mr. Jangles, the mouse, and you've got Henry Dean Stanton, who plays the janitor who goes and does stuff as well and helps out down there too, and portrays the as they rehearse how they're going to send the next prisoner to the chair. Harry Dean Stanton portrays the role of the villain, of the criminal, as they're doing their practice of it. So it's, again, not your quite typical Stephen King story until it seems like it's another Shawshank sort of story, till you discover that this big hulking, kind, big-hearted puppy dog of a man has the ability to heal people, and he was trying to heal the 2 young girls who were killed by someone who is on death row now, was caught for a completely different crime. played by the great Sam. Guy from Moon is killing me. I hate that I can't remember. Sam Rockwell, yep. So, you got that. It's a great cast. Michael Clark Duncan, Tom Hanks, David Morse, Sam Rockwell, Doug Hutchinson, Michael Jeter, James Cromwell, Barry Pepper, Bonnie Hunt, Jeffrey DeMunn, Patricia Clarkson, Harry Dean Stanton, Gary Sinise, Graham Greene, William Sadler, just phenomenal stuff. Great cast and good story idea. But the big hulking guy actually can heal people and takes away their pain and stuff like that. And he's a gentle soul. And gradually the people on the Green Mile, the police officers, learn this about him, but they can't do anything about it to help him. It's a heartbreaking story, but it's also a decent 3-hour film with a great cast and a great direction by Frank Darabont, and does a really good job of adapting the story. That was number 6, right? Number 5, is the other Frank Darabont jail movie, Shawshank Redemption. Most people know about that. 1994, it will be on my top 30 movies of 1994. Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, and just another really good, based on different seasons, and just about the story about the friendship between a white prisoner and a black prisoner. And that's it. Again, it's not your typical Stephen King thing. It takes place in jail. Nothing supernatural happens. But it's this friendship between this white guy and this black lifer. And what life is like in prison. And there's other aspects to it as well. The warden of the prison is crooked, and Tim Robbins' character is a accountant and is able to help him launder money, but he puts up with abuse and degradation and stuff like that. But it's an unflinching look at prison life over a period of about 20 years. And it culminates in again, everyone's seen the movie, and if you haven't, this isn't really a spoiler alert, Tim Robbins' escape from Shawshank, trying to screw over the warden by stealing his money. So that's the story. And it's another 3-hour, 2.5-hour long movie, but the score is fantastic. The direction is fantastic. The acting is outstanding. Got nominated for a shit ton of Academy Awards. Didn't really win anything. Wasn't a big box office hit, but it became a cult film, and everybody loves it. And it is for good reason. But it's not your typical Stephen King film. Again, it's just a friendship between a black guy and a white guy in prison, and the stuff that goes on in the span of a 20-year sentence in prison. Well shot. Beautiful score, fantastic acting. I think William Sadler's in that one also, I think. Just a phenomenal story. And sometimes can get a little uncomfortable because of some of the shit that does happen in jail. But it's really interesting to see how Tim Robbins escapes and what happens to the other prisoners in that 20-year period. So pretty interesting. Number 4 is another one from different seasons. This one's Stand By Me, which was known as The Body in different seasons. Great, directed by Rob Reiner early on in his career. Great young cast: River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, Jerry O'Connell, Will Wheaton. Kiefer Sutherland plays one of the biggest assholes in the world, but that's the character he's supposed to play. And Richard Dreyfuss plays the older version of Will Wheaton's character, who's narrating the story And again, another simple story that really is not a Stephen King typical sort of story. But again, because he does write this type of stuff, it kind of fits with it. A group of teenage boys, 13, 14, 15 years old, just goofing around, living their lives as teenagers during the summer. and one of them, Jerry O'Connell's character, learned where the body of one of their classmates was found, who was hit by a train, but he disappeared. And so the town's been looking for him and they don't know what happened to him. But Jerry O'Connell's brother and another one of his friends were off like smoking or getting high or something like that. And they stumbled upon the body of the boy who got hit by a train on a hike or whatever. And so they don't tell anybody because they think it's kind of cool to keep it a secret. And they think what they can do is they can go tell Kiefer Sutherland, who's like their boss of their gang. And what they can do is they could, take them to the body, and then they can make the claim that they found it. Maybe they get a reward for it or whatever. Jerry O'Connell overhears all this, and so he decides, why don't we do one last adventure this summer and go find this body? I know where it is. Let's go see the dead body. It's a great line that Jerry O'Connell throws, like, you guys want to see a dead body? Is the way he says it is so perfect. But what makes the film number 5 on the list is how good these kids are at acting. Yes, it's River Phoenix. Yes, it's underrated Corey Feldman. Yes, it's Jerry O'Connell. I actually cannot stand, but only because he got to fuck Sarah Michelle Gellar, Neve Campbell, and Rebecca Romaine not Rebecca Romaine Stamos, the other chick who was in X-Men who played Phoenix. And they're still married together. He was dating all, like Jennifer Love Hewitt, all these, the women in the upper late 90s who I kind of had crushes on, and he was with all of them. And that pissed me off about him. Undeservedly so, but still, whatever. But he's good at this too. And Will Wheaton is one of his first real big pictures, and he goes on to Star Trek. And then there's River, and River is River. We know River died early. He shouldn't have died, but he got caught up in the lifestyle. But he was one of the best actors out there. And Joaquin, his brother, is having the career that River probably could have had as well. Stand By Me is such a great film. Rob Reiner does a killer job directing it. Might be one of his early directing jobs as well. And that's all it really is. It's a adventure of 4 boys in their teens, knowing this could very well be like the last summer that they can spend together as kids, because next year they could all be working. They have to start working jobs, because that's what you do in the 60s. And that's what I did when I was growing up in the 80s. I had a job. I was a paper boy. And they're old enough now that they have to start getting the jobs and stuff like that. I think John Cusack's in this also. I think he plays Will Wheaton's dead brother, because Will Wheaton and all the kids have issues. And Will Wheaton, in this case, his brother, played by John Cusack, overshadows him as being the most loved child of his family. But John Cusack doesn't like that. He was always there for Will Wheaton. River Phoenix has an abusive father and has had a hard life, stuff like that. Corey Feldman is Corey Feldman in this. He is hyperactive, has some just like ADD, just kind of blah, 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 all kind of crazy stuff. And Jerry O'Connell's character is overweight, and he has issues with that. And his brother hangs out with a vicious gang guy played by Kiefer Sutherland. So they all have issues, and these issues all sort of come out to play on this last adventure that they have as kids to find this dead body. And you have the classic scene where they're on the trellis bridge and the train's coming. They have to, and they can't jump off because they would fall like hundreds of feet into a water, and they might not survive. But the train's also coming, could kill them. So there's high stakes and high intensity. There's that. There's the leeches. There's the garage dog, the garbage dog. There's the fact that Kiefer Sutherland has no problem if he needs to cutting kids with knives. He threatens them in the movie later on. And the only way he stops is when River Phoenix pulls a gun on him. And it's stuff like that just makes this film such a great coming of age film. Now it's mostly probably for boys. That's probably why it's number 4 for me, because it means so much more for me, because it's stuff I went through and I've gone through and stuff like that. So Stand By Me is number 4. And if you haven't seen it, it's just absolutely. And then there's the gross out story about the guy who eats the pies and then vomits all over everybody. It's disgusting. Those are our top three, and I've a little over than I wanted to, but that's okay. Number 3 is Misery. Again, this is like the first like real I guess Stand By Me might have been that, but the first real kind of Stephen King-esque sort of film that really got me into wanting to read his stuff. And Misery is, again, one of those stories that I'm sure Stephen King probably thinks about late at night that scares the shit out of him. And the premise itself is about a famous writer is in a car accident in the mountains during wintertime in the snow and gets saved by a woman who happens to be a nurse. Lucky for him. Problem is also she's a psychotic fan of his, and she holds him hostage because she enjoys having her idol, the person she loves more than anything, there and taking care of him. But she also has some sort of mental issues as well. And the big thing that drives the story is that the writer, in this case played by James Caan, had written a series of romantic books, and they were hugely popular. And his newest book, the newest book in the series, is just getting ready to come out. And he kills off the character because he's done writing it. He's written it for like 15, 20 years. He says, I'm done with this character. I want to write other stuff. So he just finished writing his first non-misery novel, which is Misery is the name of the character, and writes his first non-misery novel, which is basically kind of a personal story that, a fictional aspect of something that happened in his life about a group of kids who grew up in the boroughs of New York and stuff like that, and the stuff they went through. So it's a complete opposite of what Misery is. But the nurse who picked him up, played by Kathy Bates, who won an Academy Award for her role, is the biggest Misery fan out there. And then when she reads the book and she dies, she absolutely loses her fucking mind and abuses him, stuff like that, and then forces him to write a new book to bring her back because she can't be dead. And he doesn't want to. So in order to prove her point, she torches his his personal book that he just wrote that was non-misery, to force him, is like, you have to write a new Misery and continue writing them for the rest of your life. And in order to make sure he stays there, she fucking breaks his ankles with a sledgehammer, which is in one of the most grotesque sequences. This is another Rob Reiner movie. And he was another good guy who directed a lot of Stephen King stuff early on as well. And it's such a vicious film. And Caan and Kathy Bates play off each other so much, but it's also one of the most unnerving things because Kathy Bates' character is totally insane. And to have a psychotic fan hold you hostage has got to have been one of Stephen King's worst nightmares. And he writes about it, and it's such, and I read the book too. The book is just as bad. In the book, actually, she cuts off his legs, or his feet rather. And you couldn't do that in the movie. So she just broke them. I mean, literally took a sledgehammer and took the foot and went crack. He was going to be in there for a long time. And it is such an intense film and such a great, I don't know, just it's almost, again, like a theatrical play, and it is so good and it is so unnerving again that's why it's number 3. Number 2 is The Stand. Again, as I said earlier in the show, The Stand is his epic. The original version was only about 900 pages, but he redid it again and put in a bunch of new stuff and turned it to like a 2,000-page book. I got my way through it one summer when we flew out to Seattle, and drove to Vancouver and then drove down to San Francisco. I read it through that whole 10-day vacation trip we had. And I liked it. I like The Stand a lot. The story itself is phenomenal. A virus is released from a top secret government facility that kills 99% of the people on the planet. And there's a 1% that survives. Now, they focus on what is going on in the United States. The 1%ers who are still immune to this disease and are still alive start having visions or dreams. One is a dream of a kind, older Black lady in a cornfield in Nebraska or Kansas or something like that. The other and half of the 1% has that dream. The other half has a dream of a man in black cowboy boots, fire behind him, and Las Vegas. And whatever dream they have, they are drawn to those locations. So you are introduced to a wide variety, one of King's biggest casts. And that's why the book is so long, because there's so many characters in the book, but they're all so interesting. And you follow some that are going to Vegas, and then you follow some who are going to the old lady, who eventually tells them you got to go to Salt Lake, or not Salt Lake, to Boulder, Colorado. So that's the story. As I said, about 2,000 page story, tons of characters, lots of stories with all the characters. So you had to condense that into what turned out to be a 4-night movie event that happened in 1994, I believe, or 93. It might have been 93, because I don't think Sinise, it might have been 90. No, it was 93. It was 93. It was either 93 or 94, regardless. 93 or 94. And I was at college, so me and my friend Eric Anow and a few other people, we would sit out in the lounge area in our dorm, and we would watch the first night, second night, third night, fourth night. It was 8-hour mini series of the show, and we loved it. It was fantastic. Only problem I have with it is half good casting, half shitty casting. And again, you're on TV, so you can't do what you kind of really want to do. But he was able to do a lot more than you thought he could do. And I can't even, I'm just trying to remember. There's Matt Frewer, Gary Sinise, Molly Ringwald. I gotta just give the cast list, because it's Miguel Ferrer's in it. It's an amazing cast. Yeah, it was 1994 miniseries. Okay. So Gary Sinise, Molly Ringwald, Jamie Sheridan, Lara Giacomo, Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis, Miguel Ferrer, Corin Nemec, Matt Frewer, Adam Stork, Ray Walston, Rob Lowe, Bill Fagerbach, Peter Van Norden, Rick Eviles, Sam Anderson, Max Wright, Shawnee Smith, Sarah Shaw, William Newman, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Warren Frost, John Bloom, Troy Evans, Stephen King, John Landis, Dan Martin, Sam Raimi, Ray McKinnon, Tom Holland, Kathy Bates, Ed Harris, Sherman Howard, Ken Jenkins, Bill Corso, stuff like that. And it was just, there's so many characters. Now, the Molly Ringwald and the Corin Nemec characters, I think, were not very well cast. And some of the other ones, the Walking Man, Jamie Sheridan was okay, but I think I would have liked to go for someone else. But Miguel Ferrer was perfect. Gary Sinise was perfect. Ossie and Ray Walston and Bill Fagerback. And Rob Lowe, surprisingly, was very good also. But you follow the different group, the disparate groups, as they are converging on either being good or bad, and you learn eventually that it's going to be the final battle between good and evil. The evil people are dwelling in Vegas, and the good are going to be dwelling in Boulder, Colorado, and they have to figure out a way to how things are going to go with that. If war is going to erupt, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when it's all over? Are they going to be able to redo the human population? I don't know. And through the 8-hour miniseries, you get all this stuff figured out. And again, there's so much there. And again, with King, with his story, this is where it was first one where he just throws everything onto it. And the ending sort of actually technically happens like not quite at the end of the story. And then there's like an additional like 200 pages of story of what happens after, which is kind of good, but and the way it ends is you're expecting this big, massive battle between good and evil, and you don't get it. And that's the only problem really with it. But from a character standpoint, it is one of the best character studies ever out there. And the Stand 1994 miniseries is great. Now, again, I didn't watch all of the streaming miniseries because I'm just so focused on 1994's version of it. And the new one is just sort of like, it's good. It has its moments, and you're able to do a little bit more with it. But I have a heart, and that's going to happen with my number one also. So the more recent streaming television version made a little bit more sense. You actually made it like a 9 episode TV show, which made a lot more sense than a 4 2-hour sort of. It kind of works out in the end anyway. But you're able to do a little bit more with the streaming, so they're able to do a little bit more with it, which is great, to get the full scope of the story. But in the end, the story really is about the characters and the buildup of the good in one area and the bad in one area, and then it just sort of goes, okay, that's it. And then you have 2 more pages, 200 more pages to go. We're just sort of like, what? But still good. And as I said, and we're not talking about the book itself, but the movie and TV show, they pretty much follow the TV shows. They follow the same sort of format. Again, you have limitations with the TV series. The streaming, you're able to get a little bit more out of the way, but they still did enough. The sequence in the tunnel on the way from New York to New Jersey is one of the most effective sequences out there, and it was one of Stephen King's favorites, and they did it very well in the TV miniseries and in the streaming one as well. And but again, some of the casting in the miniseries was meh. It could have been better, but The Stand is my number 2 because it is still, despite the sort of of what happens at the end, the buildup alone is worth it because there is so much characters, so much buildup, and so much of possibilities of what it could be, and it's amazing. Finally, number 1, 2 hours and 15 minutes later, is It. I think it might have been also one of the first things I saw with Stephen King also to really get involved with him. Again, was a 2-part miniseries that debuted during sweeps month in May. So it was like near the end of the school year. Me and my friend Eric, again, we were hanging out. We watched it. It was pretty cool out in the lobby. And the TV miniseries again. No, actually, no, that was 1990. So we must have watched it a different time together, because I remember we did watch together, but 1990 was when it originally came out. I think I watched it on TV at home then because I was still in high school at that time. Regardless, the cast of that one is made up because it was a TV, and it was the first kind of TV miniseries for Stephen King, and it was the one that started it all. What it was such a huge hit that's what led to The Stand being made, the Langoliers, the Tommyknockers, all those, and then streaming took it to a different level, but it was all because of the original It miniseries that came out in 1990. Again, Tim Curry is Pennywise, will always be Pennywise to me. Skarsgård is never going to be Pennywise for me. I'm sorry, it just isn't. But Tim Curry is and always will be Pennywise the Clown for me. One of his best roles ever. Tommy Lee Wallace directed it. He's one of the people who worked on Halloween and is one of John Carpenter's guys as well. So you got Tim Curry as Pennywise, phenomenal job. Then you have the losers. We have Richard Thomas and Jonathan Brandis, who plays the younger version of him, who was a big teen star at that time. Annette O'Toole and Emily Perkins. John Ritter, who was huge at that time also in television. And who's the guy who played Ben? Jay Ryan. Harry Anderson from Night Court played Richie Tozier and did a fantastic job as it. Seth Green, who's a phenomenal actor, plays young Richie. Dennis Christopher and Adam Farizi plays Eddie. Tim Reed plays Mike Hanlon, and Marlon Taylor plays the young Mike. Richard Mauser plays Stanley Uris, and where's the guy? Ben Heller played young Stan. And then you get some of the supporting cast in there. You've got the mothers, the fathers, Chalon Simmons, William B. Davis, Megan Leitch, Laura Harris, Gary Chalk, Jay Burzo. And you got to have the bad guys. So you have the bad guys. Let's see their names on here. But it is another one of those that is a massive book to read. I've read the whole book. It's like a 1,200, 1,300 page book. And the book is fucking whacked out as shit, man. And the miniseries could not do nearly everything that they could with the time frame they had and with the restrictions you have for television. And there's a lot of stuff. So you got to check out read the book itself. But the way they made the movie, the first part of the movie has the grown-ups getting word that Pennywise is back, and then it flashes to a flashback of them as young kids experiencing Pennywise, and the story goes chronologically from that point. And then the second part deals with the grown-ups having to deal with the coming back to town and dealing with the Pennywise the clown. The story itself is a great idea, but it's just we're not talking about that. We're talking about the cast. The young kids were so good. The grown-ups had some, but you've got John Ritter, you've got Harry Anderson, you've got a Richard Thomas, you've got some really good actors in there as well, and they do the best. Tim Reed, they do the best they can, but the children sequences were so much better than the grown-up sections, and were able to get away with a lot of stuff, but there was a lot of stuff that they had to cut for time and for necessity that wasn't really interesting. So what you get in this 4-hour miniseries is a tight retelling sort of it, where you get the general basis of it, but you don't quite get the full mythology of it, which doesn't hinder your enjoyment of this miniseries, which is so good. And as I said, was the one that was such a huge success that it started heading off in the 1990s, where they had like a new Stephen King miniseries released almost every year, and they all did fairly successful. Now, It Part 1 and 2 of the new movie version, again, I'm colored by how much I love the miniseries. And the young kids, yeah, they were good. And the adults, yeah, they were good. Skarsgård as Pennywise, it was okay. But it's not my cast. My cast is the miniseries from 1990. And the fact is, you had that set in the 1960s, which is where Stephen King wanted it to be set. And when you made the film in 1990, or the miniseries in 1990, that made sense. It was 30 years. So when they were young, it was in the 60s, and the 90s was the present day and stuff like that. This version, they actually had to update it a little bit. And it doesn't take away from it much. I just like the 1960s era better than the 1980s era. And it's fine. It's what the book is about, except I think it's a little bit more scary and violent in the movies. The book has its fair moments of it, but it's not quite entirely all that. So I enjoyed the movies, but it's not like I would rather watch the 1990s miniseries over and over again than maybe rewatch Part 1 to the movies. Now, I know Part 1 and 2 of the movies are fantastic for a lot of people. And go for it, man. Same with the Stand recent miniseries as well. For me, being 51 years old, for me, and the memories I have of watching the 1990s It and the 1994 The Stand, those are why they're my top two. And that's why I like them over the more updated version. Whew. My longest one I've done so far. But there was a lot to cover, and I was glad to do it. So thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for still doing this. I'm only about halfway done, so got more of me tomorrow, but shouldn't be quite as long as today's is. Thanks for watching. Read some Stephen King. Watch some Stephen King. Love it. Halloween is coming.